Okay, we'll get started. We might still have a few people popping in. I will let them in as I can, but we'll get started on the core stuff because we have a lot to do, lots to cover. So we are talking about understanding and supporting children and their behaviours. And I know this is obviously something that's at the front of a lot of people's minds because we booked out this free session very quickly. In less than 24 hours. So I think it's something that a lot of services are finding challenging at the moment, which is why we decided to get it up and running. Okay, let's just make sure I've got everybody here. All right.
Hi.
So if, there we go, I think they're right. So I'd like to start off by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country that I'm on today and that you might be on today. I'm on beautiful Awabakal country in Lake Macquarie, New South Wales. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, also to any First Nations people that might be joining us during the session. I'd like to pay my respects to you also. Inspire DC strongly values its connections with First Nations culture. It's been a big focus of ours in recent years in particular, and would like to acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. Okay. So first off, to get us started, this is probably going to sound a little bit crazy or a little bit woo-woo, but indulge me. Often we come into these sorts of sessions, particularly when it's online, we come into the sessions having been working with children, or maybe you've just driven to work, or maybe you've gotten your own children off to school, or you haven't had your coffee yet, or whatever. But we can come into these sessions a little bit kind of like, bang, let's start, which can be hard. You know, it can be hard to kind of shift gears. So I want you to just take 5 deep breaths and to think about what you want to get out of today's session. And if you're comfortable, you can share it in the chat and we will go from there. Okay, a couple of really basic housekeeping kind of things. If you can keep yourself muted throughout, that would be great. We have got a large number of people in here for this session today, and we could have more coming in. So if we can keep muted, that would be fantastic because it stops the background noise that can be a little bit distracting at times. You're welcome to use the chat box function at any time if you've got a question or something you want to contribute. And if you can have your camera on, you're in a place to do that, you're welcome to. I'll keep mine on. All right. So briefly about me. So hi, I'm Nicole. I'm the co-founder of Inspire DC. We've been doing what we do now for I think 16 years this year, which has gone around really quick. I think it's actually, it might have been 16 years a few days ago and we've missed it. We didn't celebrate. I have 3 children of my own, and prior to doing what I do now, but also at the same time for some of it, I've been an educator, I've been a nominated supervisor, an approved provider. So definitely lots of experience working with those behaviours that we might call challenging. So what are we going to cover today? We have only got an hour, which is a really short period of time. I know it probably sounds like a long time, but it actually is a pretty short period of time when we're talking about children. So what we're going to look at is why children's behaviour actually is challenging, how we can understand children, how we can respond to behaviour, a little bit about rethinking our expectations, and about calm and connection. So there's lots of other stuff kind of interwoven into that. And hopefully there will be some things that you can take out of it that will help you in your practice. Okay, so first up, what are some of the challenges that you have? Let's get it all out. I'd like you to throw them in the chat. It might be things like I don't know, children who hit, or we have children who are biting at the moment, or we have some swearing happening, or we have difficulty with children running through the room, or whatever your challenge is. If you can pop them in the chat, they don't need to be long-winded, just 1 or 2 words is fine. I've got a few repetition, tunnel vision, biting, hitting, swearing, running away from educators, children who swipe items off a shelf to get attention, children that are having unexplained outbursts resulting in challenging behaviour, rough play, selective hearing, a child that grabs another child and the second they cry, biting, climbing fences, that can be a challenge, throwing items, swearing, biting, swearing, going from 0 to 100 in a second. Lots of really similar things popping up, the occasional thing that's a little bit different, but pretty similar things taking place. And so we're going to talk about some of those behaviours and also what leads to them and how we can respond to them. So we're not going into individual behaviours as such, because that can be a whole thing on its own. And usually when we do this session, we often do a 2-hour session in a service. And we'll kind of delve into those specific challenges that services are facing. So I did a session recently for a service who were having a lot of challenges with biting. So we did a really big focus on biting. But obviously in this session, we're just kind of scratching the surface almost to get you thinking about different things. Okay, so I just want to read you something that I wrote probably a couple of years ago now. I think it was in one of our blog posts around challenging behaviour. And I think it's just to think about the term challenging behaviour. So challenging behaviour sounds as though children are deliberately setting out to annoy us by behaving in a way that is contrary to expectation. In fact, the reason that a child's behaviour is challenging is on us. Perhaps our expectations are inappropriate, or our own ability to parent or educate feels threatened in some way. Or perhaps children are challenging us, and they're challenging us to build deeper, more authentic connections. I like to think that there's no bad children. You know, children don't deliberately set out to make our life a misery. Behaviour is a communication. You know, children are trying to tell us something through their behaviour. It's the same with adults. You know, we're not always at our best. We have, you know, you look at an adult who road rages, there's some challenging behaviour, and it's typically a communication. And it's a communication of unmet needs. It's a communication of feeling challenged within themselves, emotional dysregulation. There's a whole bunch of things that children and adults can be communicating through their behaviour. But it can also be a result of the interactions that we have, the relationships that we have, the environment that we're in, the opportunities that we have, the way we like to play. There's a whole bunch of things that kind of impact on that. I'm just popping back into the chat. Oh, purposely hitting their head during a meltdown. Yeah, that's a really challenging one. So we will talk about some of those when the behaviour gets really challenging. We'll finish up on that at the end as well, so that we know when we need to seek additional support. So we'll finish up on that. Okay. So why is children's behaviour challenging? So I want to touch on a couple of things that can be contributing to why children's behaviour is challenging. And I did just briefly mention the concept of unmet needs. And I think, you know, it's really important that we go back to Maslow. I know when I did my early childhood studies, and I'm going back well over 20 years, but when I did that, one of the first things we learned about was Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When I actually started working in a service, though, it wasn't something that we talked about very often as a team. And I've discovered that over the years visiting other services, that it's not always front of mind for educators and for services when we're looking at why are children doing what they're doing, behaving in the way that they are. And so I just wanted to kind of bring your attention back to the hierarchy of needs. And so you'll notice at the bottom, we've got the basic needs. So, you know, food, warmth, rest, those things are key for children. You know, there is that term of being hungry, and, you know, we feel it sometimes as adults. Children feel it too. You know, if I haven't had something to eat, my belly's rumbling and, you know, I need something, I'm not at my best. And so I can lash out. I can remember when my own children were little, you know, that was almost something that I ticked off in my brain when they were having one of those big emotional moments was, are they hungry? Are they warm enough? Have they had a sleep? Do they need a sleep? Like, I'd tick off those basic needs first because they're easy to address. You know, once we identify, hey, someone might be hungry, perfect, let's feed them. You know, that's an easy thing to address. The next one up is safety and security. Now, you think about children in an early childhood environment, it's a very different environment to home. No matter how home-like you make your environment, the early childhood environment is always going to be different. It's going to feel different. It may not feel as secure or as safe as what it does at home. Now, we're going to stop and think, okay, our environments are super secure, they're super safe, we've got gates and we've got locks, and I'm not talking about that kind of security and safety. It's that I feel secure here. I feel comfortable here. I feel safe, like someone's looking out for me, like someone cares about me. You know, it ties really well into the next one up, which is love and belonging. You know, children need to feel, and all adults, humans, we need to feel a sense of love and belonging. And, you know, so much so that that's part of our framework, you know, is belonging. It's important that children feel that. You think about the child who doesn't have those things. When I was a director, my service was in a really varied socioeconomic area. And so some of our children were coming to us, you know, from situations where they were involved with, you know, community services and child protection units. They were coming to us from a local women and children's refuge. They were coming to us with, you know, lots of different things going on. And so for some of those children, even the basic needs weren't really being met. You know, they may not have had breakfast when they came. And so that already was a poor start to the day. They may not have slept well because, you know, they were in the refuge and it's noisy there, or, you know, those sorts of things. The safety and security, you know, for a child who has been taken out of their home and put into a refuge, or for a child who is in foster care, or for a child who, all number of situations, but for us, these were the standout situations. That sense of safety and security isn't there. I don't know where I'm going home to. I don't know where my things are, which ties into the belonging. You know, how do I feel like I belong? And so many services focus on belonging as, let's put up some family photos and then children will feel a sense of belonging. That's not necessarily what belonging looks like. And I think I did a blog post on that a few months ago on our website, so you can probably find that there if you search belonging. And then above that, we go up to kind of self-esteem and self-actualization. But I really want to focus on those three bottom ones because they're the things we've got a real bunch of control over as educators and as services. So, you know, we need to be stopping and thinking, if a child is behaving in a particular way that we're finding challenging or that other children are finding challenging, let's start at those basics. I want to introduce you, if you haven't met before, to Professor Ferrelaters. Now, I talk about Professor Laters in almost all of our sessions because his work really underpins a lot of things that we do in early childhood. So Professor Laters led a team at the Leuven University in Belgium to create the Leuven Wellbeing and Involvement Scales. And I'm going to show you roughly what those look like in a moment. They're essentially a tool that are used to measure the wellbeing and involvement of children in early education and care settings. So they can be used by services to look at how are children feeling that sense of wellbeing and involvement. When children have a high level of wellbeing and high level of involvement, we notice that their behaviour is much better. We see less of those challenging behaviours when children feel good and they're doing things they enjoy. It's really kind of simple. So my former service, we had a lot of challenging behaviours, a lot. And we very much thought about wellbeing and involvement, and we made a lot of changes to the way we operated our programs, to even how our rooms were designed. We went from having a 2 to 3 room and a 3 to 6 room to having, you know, a quiet room and a loud room, and a, you know, like we changed a lot of things as a result of thinking about children's wellbeing and involvement. And as a result, the behaviours that we were seeing almost disappeared. Now, we still have the occasional thing because children are human. We're expected to have challenging emotions. We're expected to have situations that, you know, we need to learn from. We do it as adults as well. But we lost a lot of those things that were really draining us as educators. So I'm just going to touch on these really briefly. But essentially the scale is 1 to 5. 1 is our extremely low levels of well-being, so where children are showing signs of discomfort, crying, screaming, etc., to extremely high levels of well-being. So their child's happy, cheerful, joyous, I suppose. So obviously we're aiming for a 5. We're not always going to get a 5, and that's okay. There'll be external factors other than what we're doing in our services that will impact on children's well-being as well. So a child who is separating for the very first time may be at a 1, but we may be able to quickly get them to a 5, and that should be our goal. And then involvement, much the same, from extremely low to extremely high. And obviously, again, we're looking for extremely high levels of involvement where the child shows continuous and intense activity. They're concentrated, creative, energetic, whatever. And we can see that in infants who, are fascinated with a piece of silk fabric and spend 10 minutes, exploring it, feeling it on their face, whatever. That's extremely high levels of involvement. We can see that with, the 4-year-old who sits and builds Lego for, an hour without even noticing that anybody else is around. But that's obviously what we're trying to get to as well. So I want you to think about, in your service, if you're experiencing some of these challenging behaviours, what sort of well-being are we seeing for children, and what sort of involvement are we seeing for children? Okay, the 8 senses. So I just want to touch on this briefly, but we do have 8 senses, and our senses are just vital. We actually do quite a few sessions around the senses, so it's a much bigger thing. Often we think about the basics, our vision, our olfactory sense, our gustatory sense, auditory sense, tactile sense. It's the 3 on the side there, the interoceptive, the vestibular, and the proprioceptive, that we probably need to give a bit more attention to. And so I always recommend Angela Hanscom's book, Balanced and Barefoot. It's on our website. And Angela talks a lot about, particularly the vestibular and the proprioceptive sense, and how if children's sensory systems aren't receiving the right input, that's when we can actually experience a lot of those challenging behaviours. So it's definitely worth having a look at a bit more information about the senses. I will send out some notes at the end of the session for those who are still here at the end. I'll send you out some notes, and I'll put a link to some more information about the senses as well. But being aware that, our environments can kind of foster that sensory input. If we set up our environments to provide the right sensory input for children, we have less of the seeking of that. So, for example, vestibular sense could be, or actually I'll go with the interoceptive sense because I think that kind of links really well to our Maslow's stuff. So interoceptive sense is about being able to listen to the body and what the body needs, listening to those internal things. So a child who is listening to their interoceptive sense might be recognizing that they're hungry and they need to eat. If we've got a very set time that children can eat and they can't eat outside of that time, we're essentially ignoring that child's interoceptive sense. And so they can become cranky, or, we start to teach them to ignore it themselves. So there's a whole bunch of things that can happen when we don't respond to children's senses in the way that we should. Okay, I want to talk about understanding children. So this is about starting to know who children are, what they like to do, what their preferences are. And it doesn't just apply to children, it applies to adults as well. And we actually do a lot of this work for teens, around working together as teams, and we begin to understand some personality stuff. So I want to just quickly touch on the idea of extroverts and introverts. There's also ambiverts that can fit somewhere in the middle. An extrovert tends to gain their energy from being with other people, so they tend to be more social, enjoy that kind of bigger interactions. An introvert tends to gain their energy from being on their own, taking time for themselves, maybe doing things like reading. We've got to acknowledge that we have introverts and extroverts within our play spaces and within our teams, and we want to provide spaces for those children to be what they need to be. You know, this can be particularly relevant for children who are extroverts and who are loud. You know, we need to provide opportunities for them to be loud instead of seeing loud as a challenging behaviour. You know, the child who's yelling may just be loud. My son's 14 and he's so loud. He has this booming voice, and I don't know where he gets it from because I'm not loud, my husband's not loud, but he is just naturally loud. And, you know, sometimes I'm an introvert and I really struggle with his loud. And so sometimes I kind of do this to him and try and encourage him to use a softer voice and be a bit quieter. But I'm conscious of the fact that when I do that, I'm shutting down who he is. You know, that is who he is. So I've got to find spaces for him to do that. And sometimes that means let's go outside. Also be conscious of shyness. We will have some children in our care who will be shy. There's a difference between shyness and being introverted. So we can have extroverts who are also shy, but that's just something to be mindful of. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the personality types. So the 4 personality types come about from the work of Florence Littauer. And so she's got a book called Personality Plus. She's also got one, Personality Plus for Parents, which is particularly relevant for what we're talking about because it's about navigating children's personalities. We started working with Florence's book and kind of looking at that more deeply as a team, probably about 10 years ago, when we had someone on our team and we were just clashing and we couldn't quite work out why. And so we started to identify that we have different personalities, different ways of working, different ways of being. And when we understand ourselves and we understand other people, it's much easier to work with them. We then started applying that to children because we saw it in our own children. And we could see the different personalities emerging in our own children and recognised that when we responded differently to different children based on their personalities, things shifted. And that kind of ties into that whole concept of, you know, equity and equality. You know, it's like, while we say we want to treat all children equally, we actually really don't, because we will need to respond to different children in different ways because they have different ways of processing information, different ways of engaging with the world, and we need to be receptive and responsive to that. So I'm going to talk about the different personality types. There are 4 of them. Be mindful of, it's not about putting children in a box or giving them a label and saying, well, they're that, so they must always do this. It's just about a different lens to look at children and adults with. So the first one's the choleric child, and we've got some sort of descriptors and key features of a choleric child. This is typically the child who you may find the most challenging. Yeah, someone just put in the chat, you know, also boys and girls' brains are wired differently. Absolutely. You know, there's differences in all of our brains. And I think to say that we should respond to every single child or every single person in the same way is just wild. You know, I think we just need to be mindful that we all think differently, we process information differently, we function differently. So this child, the choleric child, often will be the hardest child. It'll be the child who is probably the most outwardly challenging when it comes to their behaviour. And there's a few reasons for that, as we'll see. So they tend to be strong-willed. They know what they want and when they want it. Their way is the only way. They often struggle with patience. They want to do everything right now. So if you say, yes, we can do that after lunch, that's not good enough. I want to do it right now. They have a natural desire to lead. So that's, you know, these are not all bad things. These can be good things too. So they have a natural desire to lead. They like to make the rules or have control. They need a yes response and a thorough explanation. Now, this can be hard because sometimes we don't want to give a yes response. We're giving a no response. I'm going to talk about how to support the choleric in a moment too. They know their own mind and they're not easily led. I have a choleric child. My youngest child is very choleric personality. And I like to think that when she's a teenager, she's 9 now, and she's a very challenging toddler. But I like to think that when she's a teenager, she's not going to be easily led astray. You know, like she's going to be the one that wants to lead. Maybe she'll lead others astray, I'm not sure, but she knows her own mind and what she wants. Just because somebody says, let's go do this, she's not going to say yes. So that's a real skill or positive trait as a choleric child. They may be known as the temper tantrum child or the meltdown child. You know, they're the ones that have often really big emotions. So you might be thinking of some of these children already. They might be springing to mind. As I say, they're often the child that feels most outwardly challenging. They might be the one that you see in the shopping centre having a big meltdown on the floor. They tend to be more outwardly expressive in their emotions, which can be challenging. It doesn't mean that they've necessarily got bigger emotions, but they're very expressive in those emotions. So we'll talk about how we can support the choleric child. So we need to give them opportunities to lead, you know, actually meaningful opportunities to lead, to be the leader of something. You know, so this is kind of the preemptive stuff that we can do. If we give children these things, we tend to not need to fix things afterwards because we're kind of preempting that that's what they'll need. And I'll give an example of this in a minute. We need to give them opportunities to make decisions. They like to be able to make decisions and make choices. And, you know, obviously we're going to have to be mindful about that, but where we can. So if, for example, I have, I don't know, 3 different colours of cup and I'm handing them out at lunchtime and I don't give any choices and, you know, I give the choleric child the green cup and they say, oh, but I wanted a red cup. And you say, well, bad luck, you get what you get, you don't get upset, like that's it. They struggle with that. And it's not because they're bratty and it's not because, you know, they always get what they want, but they like to have choice and they like to have power over their own decision making. So if we're not in a position to be able to give children choice over what cups they have, then let's have all the cups the same colour. And then it's not a choice. We're actually removing the choice. Give them opportunities to do real work. So they like having real tasks. My youngest, as I say, who is very much this personality, loves a job. Her teacher actually said to me, a parent teacher, and it was, gee, she loves to help with things, doesn't she? I said, yeah, she does. I said, she likes a job, but it has to be a real job. You know, like something that actually needs to be done, not a made up thing. You know, it's got to be a proper job, something that's going to contribute. She likes to contribute to others. They're often very caring, choleric children. You know, they're very loving, but they need opportunities to show that in the right way. Choose your battles. This was my mum's advice for me when I had children, and particularly when my youngest was a toddler. And I think it was my mum's advice because I'm also a choleric personality. And so I was probably a pretty difficult child too at times. So she said, choose your battles. You know, some things are not worth the fight and some things are. And, you know, with my youngest, for example, getting in her car seat was always a battle. And once she's always, choleric children are often very independent. They like to be able to do things for themselves, ties into the real work. She wanted to be able to get into her car seat herself. So she liked being able to go from the footwell up into the seat, put the straps in, click the thing in, and then I'd check it. And she was happy for me to check it if she got to do all those things. Now, if I forgot or I was running late and I just tried to lift her into her car seat, she'd turn stiff as a board. You know, like the whole body would be stiff. I wouldn't be able to get her in that seat no matter how hard I tried. She'd have a big meltdown. We could spend 20 minutes trying to then get into the seat, me trying to rationalise with her. Rationalising doesn't work with a child having a big emotional response. And for me, that battle wasn't worth having. So I factored it into my routine that we left the house 5 minutes earlier to allow time for her to get into her car seat herself. You know, it was a little switch that made a massive difference. It gave her the chance to do something for herself, have that independence, have that power and control, but without the battle, you know, without that fight. Pair them up with the right friends. So they need the right friends who will actually keep them challenged. You know, we've got to be mindful that this child can be bossy at times. So, you know, we've got to pair them up with the right people. Okay, the melancholy child. So the melancholy child, this is my other personality type. And that's my melancholy child at the bottom there, who's now 11, definitely not looking like that anymore. Although the serious face is still there at times. They tend to be emotional. You know, they might be the child that goes into a puddle of tears really quickly. You know, they feel things fairly deeply. I often say my middle child is a real empath, to the point where, you know, if someone feels sick in the stomach, she starts to cry and get upset because then she feels funny. It's a really strange thing, but she's obviously emotionally connected to people. They can be quieter, which means they can slip under the radar. We can kind of miss them a little bit at times. They like rules and they like things done the right way. So they can get really stuck on things being done by the rules. And so that can lead to conflict with other children, even though the melancholy child might not be, you know, the yelling, fighting, hitting kind of child. They might become emotional when another child might not follow the rules, for example, of a game or something. They look typically pretty organised, which is a strength. You know, melancholy people are typically organised. They like a list. They like organisation and structure. They might like to be by themselves, so they often do crave time by themselves. They crave routine and security, which ties into the organisation stuff, and the rules and things being done the right way. They like routine and security. They like to know what's happening next. They're often seen as serious, and they can be a bit glass half empty or a bit negative sometimes. You know, like you plan something for them and they're already thinking that it's going to be over and we're not going to get to do that anymore. And so, you know, they can get a bit sulky, I suppose, for lack of a better word. So how do we support that child? We give them time and space to process their emotions. So if they're having an emotional response, letting them know, I'm here for you, but I'll also give you space if you need it, is really valuable for them. So they like to be connected. They like to know that you're there to support them, but sometimes they also like to, you know, kind of deal with it themselves. And likewise, give them privacy when they're upset. They don't like to be put on show. So, you know, they might be the child who goes to tears and then goes behind someone's legs or, you know, whatever, because they don't, or they go hide in the corner, or they won't come out from under something or whatever, because they don't like to be put on show. Get them involved in developing rules, systems, routines, structures, those kinds of things. Give them opportunities for real helpful tasks, and prepare them for change to routines. So I'm not saying we need to get stuck in structure and routine just because we have melancholy children in our space, but we need to be mindful that they may find that challenging. So if we have a change to routine for whatever reason, we're going on an excursion, we're getting our photos taken, whatever, we need to prepare that child or those children for that change, because it may not come easily for them. The sanguine child can also be challenging at times in different ways. So the sanguine child is curious. They have a strong sense of wonder. So that might mean that they are getting into things that they perhaps shouldn't be getting into, or testing things out to see how things work, which might mean that things get broken, because they're experimenting and exploring because they've got that sense of wonder. They're highly responsive to the world around them. So whatever's going on around them, they tend to take in. They want everything to be fun. So they don't like boring things. They like things that are fun, which means that, you know, when it's pack away time, for example, they don't really want to do that because that's boring. So it's funny, actually, I know we're talking about children, but Tash, my other half of Inspired EC, we're very different personalities, and she is a sanguine. And we always say that, you know, I'll come along and clean up after her because I recognise that it's just not fun for her anymore. Whereas for me, as a choleric melancholy, I love the organisation and getting things done. And so I'm happy to come in and, you know, clean up a space where she's made a mess. When we work together in a preschool room, she would literally be on this wild adventure of, you know, exploration with children. They'd be doing some project and she'd have all this stuff out and whatever. And then she'd go to lunch and I'd be like, all right, well, it's my turn to shine. I'll clean it all up now. And I know that feels crazy to some people, and we talk about that a bit in our team building stuff, but for us it worked because we were actually recognising the strengths that we had. And I know that she wasn't just leaving a mess because she was like, oh, well, I'm lazy, Nicole can do it. It was literally that just wasn't something that kind of twigged in her mind. I suppose she didn't even see it half the time. They can be forgetful, you know, so they might forget to put their hat on when going outside, even though it's something that you do every day. And, you know, they might need reminders about things, whatever those things are. They can be impatient, you know, they like everything to happen now. They're not great at finishing or packing away, as I just touched on. So when it's pack away time, this child might be playing with something over in a corner, or just doing a bit of a lap around the room, or dancing, or fiddling in the bathroom, or they will be doing anything else to get out of packing away. And again, it's not just because they think, oh, well, everybody else should have to do it. But for them, it's like, well, this isn't fun. I don't want to do this. They're easily distracted. So, you know, when we're asking them to go and do something, or we're having a conversation with them, they might be like, oh, wait, there's a bird outside. You know, like all of a sudden something else has got their attention, links into that highly responsive to the world around them. And they're the social butterfly. So they're often a child that has lots of friends, and will often play with lots of different groups of children. But that can be challenging at times because, you know, they want to be best friends with everybody, and, you know, that doesn't always work. So that's our sanguine child. So supporting the sanguine child, we want to give them opportunities for spontaneity and for new things. We want to be succinct in our explanation and direction. So if I want a child to go and get their hat and shoes, put their sunscreen on, and then come and line up at the door, then I need to do that in broken down steps. I can't say, go and get your shoes, then go back to your bag, get your hat, then you can go into the bathroom and you'll find the sunscreen. Like, too long-winded for the sanguine child, too long-winded for a lot of children, to be honest, but particularly for the sanguine child, they're really going to struggle with that. Don't drag things out longer than necessary. You know, make things as quick as possible if it's, you know, routine tasks or, you know, things that they might not find as enjoyable. Get it done. Give them attention and connection. As a social butterfly, they crave attention and connection. So, you know, give them that time for one-on-one connection, you know, to do those fun things, and be playful. Make as many things as possible playful. So, you know, use silliness, use song, use movement, you know, be playful with children. Too often we get, and this is with all children, but too often we get so serious, you know, with we need to do this and we need to, and we turn into teachers and put our teacher hat on, and we don't have that playfulness. You know, life is for being playful. And the last one's the phlegmatic child. So this one is probably less of a child that you would find challenging. If you think about your children that you know, are challenged by at the moment, less of them are going to have this sort of dispositional personality, but they also can. So they tend to be described as easygoing and laid back, but they can be quietly stubborn. So, you know, one of my children, my middle child, is also this personality, and, you know, she's so easygoing. She'll go along with most things. Once she decides she's done, then she's done. You know, like, I'm not doing that. And she just, bang, draws the line, digs the heels in. She ain't doing it. At times they may appear lazy, you know, like, oh, I don't want to do that, or, you know, like, and that's linked to that being laid back. Can be unresponsive. Again, this is my middle child. You know, sometimes when you say something to her, particularly if she thinks she's in trouble, she just blanks you. You know, it's just no expression, no response. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to acknowledge it. They may be slower during transitions, so it may take them a little bit more time. You know, with transitions, they adapt well to different situations. They love to eat and they like to rest. So, you know, keep them well fed and rested, and they're usually pretty happy. They tend to be described as having a sweet disposition. So how do we support the phlegmatic child? Don't put them on the spot to answer a question or to be a leader. It's not that they can't be a leader or that they don't want to contribute, but being put on the spot is really quite confronting for them, and they will often then blank you. So you want to give them time and space, and let them come to that. It's not that phlegmatic children or adults can't be leaders, they can, but they need to come to that themselves. Have patience with them, you know, particularly when things are slow. Allow extra time, give them opportunities for rest and relaxation, and ensure that they are well fed. So what does it all mean? None of the types are specifically positive or negative. They've got upsides, they've got downsides. It's not about judging children. It's not about placing them in a box. It's about helping us to observe and identify what's happening, but also to tailor our response to children, to set up our environments in a way that supports different, you know, personalities, our routines, those kinds of things. So in summary, a choleric likes it my way, melancholy likes it the right way, sanguine likes it the fun way, and the phlegmatic likes it anyway. So they're the personality types. I will give you a link afterwards that has some more information on that, and also can link to the book around that as well. But that can be a real game changer, understanding who children are and how they kind of interact with others and with their world can really shift so many things in the way that we work with children. Okay, responding to challenging behaviours. So when we do have the behaviours that challenge us, we need to think about how we respond to those, because our response is either going to feed the behaviour or it's going to support children to kind of work through the behaviour, because that's often what it is. You know, it's often something that children need to work through rather than something they're doing to us or doing to someone else. So when we respond to challenging behaviours, we need to understand the child. We need to understand ourselves. So we've just talked about understanding the child, but understanding the child might be more than just their personality too. It might be knowing what's going on in their life, what their dynamic is in the home. Like, you know, are they the youngest child? Do they get everything, you know, they don't get a say in anything at home because they're the youngest and the older siblings always talk for them, or, you know, all those sorts of things that we might need to understand about the child, understanding, you know, their culture, like anything, really, anything we need to know about the child, we need to be thinking about. Understanding ourselves, so understanding who we are, what our personality type's like, the way we respond to situations, what challenges us. You know, for some people, being hit isn't a problem. You know, for others, that could be really quite challenging or confronting. I'm not saying it isn't a problem as in, oh, well, we should just deal with it. But, you know, we will be kind of challenged by different things. Seek to connect, you know, where possible, seek to connect, you know, connection first. If you're having a hard time, you know, as an adult and you're, you know, throwing things on the floor and do you want people to judge you, criticize you, control you, or do you want people to connect with you and support you? Now, I'm not saying that's always easy, and we're going to talk about that as we continue, but it's not always easy, but it is something that we need to try to do. Reconsider our expectations, we'll talk about that in a minute, and respond versus react, you know, and we can be, as humans, we can be quick to react to a situation where we actually need to respond to a situation. So some things that we should be considering, and I'm not going to go too deeply into these because I'm conscious of the time. We need to think about families. So that's looking at what our family backgrounds are like, what's going on in the home, what the culture is of that family, what's important to that family, parenting styles, like all kinds of things will come into how children are within our space. Our environment. So our environments speak to children. You know, I visit a lot of early childhood services, and the ones where, you know, they have environments that are well resourced and that are actually designed for children to be independent, to do the things that they want to do and enjoy to do. You know, those sorts of things make such a difference to how children behave within that environment. And even our environments in terms of, you know, having enough outdoor space that children can run or roll or, you know, get out some of that big body stuff that they need to do. And we've actually got a session coming up maybe next month or the month after around big body play and the importance of that. I'll make sure I send that through with the notes afterwards as well. Routines, so things like how many transitions are we having? How many interruptions to children's play do we have? And that's such a huge thing. And again, another session all on its own just around interrupting play. But, you know, we interrupt children's play a lot with routines and we don't always need to, you know, so we could be thinking about what our routines do for children. What sort of blocks of time do children have for play and interaction? Because if we're constantly stopping and starting and stopping and starting and saying, you need to come here and you need to do this, we then get a lot of that resistant behaviour. So they're just a few things that we can consider. Rethinking our expectations. So, you know, think about what we're expecting from children. Are the expectations that we have on children and on their behaviour reasonable? You know, is it reasonable to expect a 2-year-old to share? And if it's not, then our response needs to have that in mind, that it's not reasonable to expect them to share, so that when they then don't share, as they inevitably will do, I'm not, oh, how mean, why would you take that from him? You know, like I would respond in a completely different way because I know it's unrealistic to expect that that 2-year-old is sharing with the other 2-year-old. Recently, I did some stuff around biting, I think, on our website, and just around the language that we often use with that. And Dan Hodgins was an early childhood professional in the USA. He's since passed, sadly, but one of the things he said to me once, and I've heard him say it in a few training sessions, is we need to stop making developmental issues into moral issues. And what that means is things that are developmentally appropriate, you know, they're developmentally expected, they're the norm for that age group, we can't assign moral judgment to those. So, you know, the 2-year-old that bites is quite normal, and yet we still call them a biter. Oh, you know, such and such is a biter, and, you know, the parents don't want to be the biter. So, you know, it's really important that we have that rethinking of our expectations, whether our expectations are reasonable, and if they're not, then that changes how we respond. It doesn't mean that, you know, biting's okay. For example, we don't want children to bite, but we also know that it's going to happen. How do we respond to it in a way that, you know, is still respectful of the child and doesn't assign that child with a moral judgment of being a biter, for example? Reflecting, understanding, and communicating. So this is a little example. Jeff Johnson over at Playvolution HQ has a little event sampling record. Well, there's so many of these that you can find, but this one's just a nice simple one for if you're seeing behaviour occurring over time, then you want to be recording it. Particularly if you then need to address that behaviour with a parent, then you can kind of evidence what's been happening and when it's happening, but it's also going to help you to kind of identify what leads up to this. You know, how did we get to this behaviour? And then what happens after it? So we want to observe behaviour over time and in various situations and get a variety of perspectives. So it shouldn't be just one educator observing a child's behaviour. If we're seeing something that we're concerned about, we need multiple educators, perspectives and opinions and, you know, observations and whatever, because we all see things differently, you know. And while we might like to say we can be unbiased in our judgment and whatever, we all bring biases. So it's important that we get that variety of perspectives. It can help us to have authentic, kind conversations with families. Now, again, this is another whole thing on its own that I'm not going to go too deeply into, but families need to feel comfortable to come to our services. And if every time a parent walks in the door, the first thing that they are told is your child bit, your child hit someone, your child did this, your child did that, they're not feeling comfortable and safe to be in our service. Now, I'm not saying we then don't have those conversations with families, but we're mindful of how we do that. We need to give families, you know, the sandwich is, you know, essential. We need to give families the positives before we start on anything that might be negative or might feel challenging for the family, because they're going to get to a point where they don't actually want to come and pick their child up because the first thing they hear is, hey, this is negative. Beautiful. So we've got in the chat, Donna's shared that they've changed their terminology to child wellbeing plans and engagements, which we then share with families. And I love that. I think that's a really important thing, is sometimes we need to look at our terminology that we're using and, you know, put children then at the centre. And that's exactly what that does. That child wellbeing puts children at the centre of that. It's about us supporting children rather than, you know, disciplining children or, you know, fixing a problem, because children aren't a problem to be fixed. You know, they're human beings with human emotions and human expressions, but they need supporting, you know, and they need supporting to be at their best. And we can also discuss respectfully with colleagues. So if you're having a conversation with a colleague about a child's behaviour, you're not having that conversation anywhere near other children. You know, we don't need other children hearing about a child's behaviour. And it doesn't matter how young those children are, those conversations need to be elsewhere and respectfully. The importance of calm. So when we're responding to children, I like this quote because this is very fitting. When little people are overwhelmed by big emotions, it's our job to share our calm, not join their chaos. So when they've got big emotions, we can't respond with big emotions because it creates chaos. We need to respond with calm. So, you know, that then means that we need to work on being calm ourselves. And there's a whole bunch of things that we can do for that. So how can we stay calm? You know, it's such a cliche, but self-care, you know, we need to look after ourselves. We need to be well rested. We need to have eaten. We need to have downtime. We need to make the most of any breaks that we have, you know, and that might mean not sitting in the staff room scrolling on my phone and thinking, oh gosh, I've got to go back out there. It might mean going for a walk out in the fresh air. It might mean going and reading a book. It might mean, you know, a whole bunch of things, but things that are going to fill me back up so that I'm right to go out and actually support children and share that with them rather than, you know, just kind of depleting me further. You know, gratitude, it can be really hard sometimes when and I've been in services and in spaces where we've had some really challenging behaviours, and some days you just leave at the end of the day and think, oh, I just want to cry and it was awful, and you get to the point where you start thinking every day is going to be awful. So you need to focus on some positives as well, because there will be positives. You know, it might be we got through lunch without anybody fighting or throwing their food. Like, we just got through lunch today and it was a really lovely lunchtime, you know, whatever. Like, focus on those positives, either individually with the team, but also with families, particularly for specific children where there's some ongoing challenging behaviour. Have that gratitude and positivity with your families too. Practice the pause. So before we react, take a pause and then respond. Because if I see a child hit another child, my instant reaction would be, oh my goodness, we don't hit. Like, that's, you know, that's unkind, or blah, blah, blah. You know, don't hit that person, move away, or whatever. Whereas if I take a pause and I'm calm, my response might be, oh, I noticed that you hit your friend. Tell me what happened, you know, because then I find out that, well, the other child had just hit them or had stolen their thing or whatever. And while the hitting still might not be a great, you know, outcome, we can then have a conversation and an actual response. Reframe the situation. So, you know, Janet Lansbury says, you know, she kind of uses in her brain, I understand that difficult behaviour is a request for help. You know, so saying that to yourself, you might want to have it as an affirmation somewhere in your space, you know, that reminds us that it's not about the child trying to be difficult for me. It's, you know, about a request for help or an unmet need. I had another thought, but it went just as quick as it came in my brain. So if it comes back again, I'll share it. If not, I'll hold on to it until another time. All right, so another quote that's really helpful: discipline is helping a child solve a problem. Punishment is making a child suffer for having a problem. To raise problem solvers, we need to focus on solutions, not retribution. And this actually does tie in with the thought that just popped into my brain, was we need to be focused on supporting children to solve problems rather than, you know, punishing them for having the problems. And so if two children are fighting over a toy, it might be easier to say, well, now no one has it, or you go over there and you go over there and then I'll take this away, or let's get another one, or whatever. But we need to work with children to solve problems. And the reason why this is hard is because it takes more of our time. And sometimes we feel like we don't have enough time because I need to be doing other things, but this is time. There's a really great quote, and I haven't got it in here and I'll butcher it for sure, but it's like, either we spend the time kind of, you know, working through things with children, supporting them, connecting with them, whatever, or we spend the time kind of fixing the problems, dealing with it, whatever. Either way, we spend the time. And I think I'd rather spend the time with the connection and, you know, all of that kind of stuff rather than fixing the problems later, if that makes sense. I'll find the actual quote because it's much better. Which leads us into connection. So Brené Brown defines connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. I'm going to show you a really quick video.
The estimate is that something in the neighborhood of 80% of the sentences adults say to children are commands. Now think about how that is. I mean, it's come here, eat that, sit down, bring that to me. You know, sometimes we'll say, stop doing that, please. You know, we have the please there as if that softens it, but really it's still a command. it's still giving the children no choice. When we command somebody to do something, we really don't give a chance for someone to think. We give them a chance to either obey or disobey. And they only have two choices. I mean, you've probably said this before. I know I've said it before. We'll say, well, Sally, she doesn't listen to me. I think that she is listening to you. She's just not making the choice you want her to make, because you're only giving her two choices and there's no room for her to think.
So I just wanted to share that while we talk about connection, because I'm probably going to muck this up now, as I do every time, because I like the way that Teacher Tom talks about that around speaking to children in commands. Like, we want to build actual relationships with children, then we can't be that, always commanding, always kind of instructing. We need to do things like show genuine interest, greet children, start each day fresh. So even if, Toby was awful yesterday and, they hit you and punched you in the eye and you thought, oh my gosh, I never want to see that child again, start each day fresh. We have to start from a new place with children, because thankfully, for the most part, they do start over. They got short memories with some of that stuff. They will start over, they'll wash it off. And we need to be able to do the same and build that connection. Seek out shared interests, listen to children, like really listen to children, not listen while you're looking at an iPad or, doing something else, but actually look them in the eye and have that connection, make time for them and slow down, actually just slow down and be present with children. So when do we seek additional support? So if behaviour is increasingly violent, if it's routinely impacting on other children, or if the child's time at the service is not enjoyable for them, we need to be looking at additional support. So that might be through like inclusion support, it might be through funding avenues, it might be through, making referrals for the child to different specialists if we think there is something else that's going on that they might need additional support with, working with professionals that are working with the child. It's looking at all those different avenues for how we can support that child and the family, but also the educators, because it is hard. It is hard when a child's behaviour is having that impact on the space and on everyone within the space. So we need to be able to look at, how we make those steps towards additional support and what that looks like and when we do that. And you'll know, if you're sitting here now thinking, oh my gosh, I've got a child that every day is just getting more and more violent, or, they're impacting on other children, it's not enjoyable for them, then we need to seek some other support. Okay, so as we wrap up, lots of information in 1 hour. As we wrap up, I want you to do what we did at the start, which is just take those 5 deep breaths. Think about what you hope to get from the session and whether you actually got it. And also, if you can, share in the chat one thing that you think you'd like to implement, change, work on, or think more deeply about in the coming weeks. It might be just something that you want to go away and talk to a team member about. It might be something that you want to read more on or reflect on, or anything at all. So if you can share that in the chat. Now I'm going to put in the, if I can get to it, I'm going to put in the